Hello, I wanted to do a lecture here on. Hello, today we're going to talk about functions and using conditionals inside of functions. So we know that we can use JavaScript functions to perform different kinds of code operations. We just have our basic syntax of the function keyword, the name, and then our code block. But we can also nest conditionals inside of our functions. So we have I skipped the slide there. We have our function. We have a basic conditional statement, if something else, this is actually not written correctly here, but anyway, we can go ahead and place the conditional inside of the function like this. So this way we're making use of both the function and the conditional statement. In this case, we're not using any arguments or parameters in this function, so we can't pass it as an argument to the function call, but in this case we can still use the condition variable from outside of the function. But if we want to make use of conditionals inside of functions, usually we're going to be passing some parameter or be passing some argument to the function, and that inside of that function it's going to be making use of the parameter in the function declaration multiple times, and this way we can go through and get different results or outputs based on what the argument will be. So in this case we have a user's age, and depending on what the age is, we get different text printed out to the console. So when we use conditionals inside of functions, we know that we have the return statement inside of a function to give us back a value, but if we are using conditionals inside of a function, we can have multiple return statements. So since the return is inside of the conditional block, it's not going to exit out of the entire it will exit the function execution once we hit the return, but it depends on whether it hits the first one or the second one. Like if the condition of the first if is false, then we'll get the return of the second conditional here instead. So that is to say, we can have multiple return statements just inside of each of our conditional blocks here for our functions with conditionals. I wanted to also talk about switch statements, which are just a little different kind of a conditional. The syntax is like this. We got the word switch, keyword switch, and we have our expression in the parentheses. And inside the code block, we have each of our cases that get evaluated. So once one of the cases gets hit, the execution stops, and the switch has found its comparison. So in this case, let's go and look at a little more of a clear example. So when we have something like the number of a weekday, so if we're doing weekdays in JavaScript, we usually represent Sunday as 0, Monday as 1, and so on. So in this case, the switch statement will take in this value as a parameter, or not as a parameter actually. It will just take in this. It's just an expression in this case. It's not a parameter because it's not being reused. So it'll say what is weekday number. Let's assume that it's 1. So first it'll check, is it 0? No. Is it 1? Here it is. And then it'll go and execute the code block inside of the case for the value of 1. So notice the syntax here. We have the keyword switch, the expression, we have the code block, and then we use colons here for each case. We indent, and we have a break for each case, which just stops the execution of the code block after the end of each case. And then at the bottom we have a default, so this is in case none of the other cases have been met. This kind of can compare to the else statement in an if else. So here we can just take a look at the same code block side by side if we're using an if else versus if we're using the switch statement. So we can see that they're both giving us the same results, but for the switch statement, it can be a little bit easier to read. It actually ends up being a couple extra lines in this case, if we're counting lines, but still we have the fact that like each case is clearly placed on top of the next one, so the values are all lined up. We don't have to have the weekday number expression in each line. We just use it the one time at the top, and then the case basically does the triple equals to that each time. And what else is there? Yeah, another trade-off though is the fact that we're just using the case compared to the expression passed into the parentheses means that we can't use different things besides weekday number. Like if we wanted to use some other expression, like we wanted to say if I don't know, like if date month equals something, we couldn't put a case for date month because it wouldn't really make sense. We could still put that case in there. We would put it inside parentheses and do the comparison, but it wouldn't. It doesn't really make sense as much in a switch statement. So switches are more for just using those single values to compare to the original expression. And switch statements, they can be a little bit easier to modify if we want to change a value. So that's one reason to use them. And they can compile faster when we have lots of different cases. The JavaScript the compiler doesn't have to check each comparison here when it's going that. It doesn't have to check weekday number equals this, and then it doesn't have to check each one. It just has to say, is it this? No. Is it this? No. And then it goes down the chain until it finds the right one. So it compiles faster than using if else, and it's also just it can be a little bit cleaner and easier to read. And so you'll see it used sometimes, but I think if and else if are more versatile and more commonly used. But sometimes I would say it's a good idea to use a switch statement depending on what your application is. So that's pretty much it. I have some exercises for my class here that I haven't fully written out, but just wanted to go over that with you guys. So thank you for watching.